All right, we'll get started this morning, and Todd kind of summed up this entire session with that, how the gather goes, so goes the day. But how we get the gather and the cattle to working for us, I think, is kind of where the whole stockmanship and being effective in what you do, that discussion comes into play. But when we talk about gathering cattle, or at least starting cattle, and these heifers are not bouncing off the wall, so there's not a whole lot of flat to the heifers, but I don't know how they work. We've not worked them yet, so we'll see how that goes in just a moment. They're certainly not afraid of horses. They may be more responsive on foot than they are on horses. You never know till you start working cattle and you don't know what their background or history might be. Now your cows at home, you kind of know what they're used to, and we're going to do this horseback and on foot, but the whole discussion around whether you can use ATVs or other means of transportation, other methods to get cattle gathered, of course you can. It's just a matter of how you use the tool you've got and the best way to do that. We've got yearlings here, just the primary reason it's easier to haul them 3 hours than it is a set of pairs and have them balling all during the session. But there's some things unique, I think, to pairs that we need to talk about. We talked about this yesterday as well, is if you're going to start a gather, normally you want to start gathering cow-calf pairs pretty early in the morning before they bed their calves down. Is actually easier. If you can go out around, and I heard Kurt tell this story, and I've seen my dad do it as many times in the past as well, but if you'll go out and just start making some motion and movement around the cows, they tend to go back to their calves. If you start trying to push them off or call them off, they'll walk away from their calves a lot of times, particularly if they've bedded them down for the day or the morning. So there's things to think about in getting those cows up, letting them mother up first, and then taking the cow-calf pairs. The other thing you can do is start a little earlier than that, and as soon as you have pairs, teach that cow and calf to drive off of pressure or move off pressure. And so anytime you show up and start trying to move them, the cow and the calf know that they're supposed to go together. That's one of the downsides to calling cows. If you use some feed to bait them in, they're kind of like anything else. You get enough feed in front of them, they're going to go off and leave their family behind to go get it. And so we have to be a little bit careful about that. If you are going to use feed to draw cattle to you, one thing you can do before you start that process, and we see this a lot of times, if you want the cattle to go way over on this side of the pasture, you'll just go to that side of the pasture and go honking or shake a feed sack, and the cattle will all trot over there to you. And I had this discussion yesterday with a young man afterwards. What's happening to him, most of his cows go, most of his calves go, but there'll always be a few cows hang back, and the calves will hang with them, and then they can't get them in the corral. So trying to get all those to move as a unit is kind of what we're after in that gather, because I hear that story all the time about the calves being left behind. And if you can start cattle right, and this is my goal every time I gather cows and calves, is to not have the calves at the back when we go through the gate. And that's hard to do, to get the cows to keep those calves with them as they go forward and go out to pasture. But when it does happen, it makes you feel pretty good. There might be one or two calves trailing out with them last cows. So that's the goal on the cow-calf pairs. And Kurt, you may want to weigh in here on any time on the pair side of it as well. But even if you're using a vehicle to move cows, maybe you go to the cows first and just maybe sit there. They're going to come to you, but if you don't feed them, what do? They'll normally go away, and then they can pick their calves up, or they'll more likely to, and then you can start moving them, and move them slow. That's something else we have a tendency to do. We get in a hurry because they will trot following you, right? And so we take off too fast and we string those cattle out, and the cows lose contact with the calves, and we don't get them all to the corral at the same time. What normally happens the calves run back to where they were originally bedded down and where they last nursed, and you're left with split pairs and don't get them all worked that day. That's a common thing we hear, so there's ways to work around that. The easiest way, I think, is either on foot or horseback, or even with an ATV. You can go out there and get the cows up, get the calves up, and kind of bunch them up, get them paired up before you take off. I have a young man that works for me in Texas, and they use ATVs to rotate pastures in their rotational grazing program. but he was having trouble moving his cows with his ATV. They didn't own horses. His dad didn't want to walk, so they were trying to figure out how to do it. And I'd heard about a guy who used a coach's whistle, and that was his signal to get the cows to rotate. They didn't rotate until he used the whistle. So I told him that you might try it, and he was telling me about 2 months later, he said, that whistle works really good. He said, when we drive out there and we're ready to move cows away from us, we blow the whistle. He used it entirely backwards from what I was thinking, but it signaled those cows that it was different. And so when he blew the whistle, the cows started moving away from him, and then they could keep that motion going. So there's ways to make these tools work. You just got to figure out what works in the best interest of the cattle and trying to get them to move away from pressure and in the direction you want them to go. Horseback to me is a little easier sometimes because you don't have to look at the terrain that you're going over. The horse can do that for you. They can also find cows. They can find calves that might be bedded down somewhere you might not see. And that is one argument you always hear in the motorized vehicle versus a horse. That is something. Plus, you're up higher. You have a higher perspective. You can kind of see what's developing in the area in front of you around the cows and kind of know where motion has started and where it's going to go. But not everybody uses horses, so you got to think about different ways to do that. On foot, I really like working young pairs on foot because sometimes with a horse, they see a big furry animal, they may actually come to you a little bit, so you got to be real careful not to draw them to you and teach them to actually kind of come away or move away from pressure and go with their mother. So it takes a little bit of time actually, for me, a little more time horseback than it does on foot to teach them to drive with the cow. So those are just some tips on the cows. Since we don't have any cows here to work with and show that aspect, it might not be very difficult to do that either.